I'm Willie D. Nelson from All Things Good and Nerdy, a pop culture podcast, part of the Gonna Geek Network. Just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other tantalizingly geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
This is a special episode. This is a guest episode. Not really sure what to call this one. It's not exactly creators on the couch, but this isn't a standard comic book character issue either, but it's a conversation we wanted to have, and it's a guest that we're certainly thrilled to have. We are happy to welcome with us the founder of We Matter 2 and a very prolific mental health advocate in her own right, Dr. Ashley Perkins. Dr. Perkins, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So, Dr. Perkins, you are, as I said, the founder or the co-founder, I believe, of We Matter 2, and the motto is Together End the Stigma. And that is something that Doc and I have spoken about at length many, many times for the past 4.5 years on this show. Is about ending the stigma around the conversations around mental health. So when I saw you very active on Twitter, and I said, this is someone that we absolutely need to get on the show to get that kind of insight. So again, we're very happy to have you here. So before we get into We Matter 2, tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to represent this field.
So I graduated from Butler University in '08 with my doctorate of pharmacy and started out as a community pharmacy. So worked for CVS and some independent pharmacies. And so my husband works for the railroad. So every time he got promoted, we got moved. I've collected 3 state licenses along the way. We've lived in Maryland, West Virginia. Where else have we lived? Kentucky. We're now in Florida. So we've moved all over creation. And finally, I decided I needed to get out of community pharmacy because, well, community pharmacy burns you out. And so I decided to start teaching students. I joined Marshall University in 2017 in West Virginia, and I started teaching pharmacy students. And that's when I started to get into mental health. Like, I started to get into that area because I started teaching in that area. And unfortunately, at that time, I volunteered for a youth organization for almost 20 years at this point. And unfortunately, I had a board member discriminate against me for my mental health. And of course, I reported it. I'd never had hidden my mental health from anybody, and they didn't do anything about it. I went through the whole retribution. I ended up having to resign my position. I held a high position. I was the leadership seminar chair for one of the state sites at the time. I ended up resigning my position, went through 8 months of bullying and emotional abuse before I finally decided to leave the organization, again, after 20 years of being part of the organization. That lasted for about 8 months in 2019. So after that happened and I left, I told them this wouldn't be the last time they heard from me because I was going to raise awareness about what happened because this wasn't okay. Really, what they wanted me to do was to sit down, be quiet, and not talk about it anymore. They wanted to silence me and get rid of me. But that's not how I roll. Like, I don't sit down and shut up very well, especially when something bad has happened and I know it's wrong. So I left because there was nothing else I could do, but I knew I wanted to do something. And here I am, a pharmacist, educated. I have privileges as a pharmacist, and I'm working within this space as a pharmacist. And I'm like, there's got to be something I could do. And this was towards the end of 2019, going into 2020. And I was talking to my friend John, who I also knew from the same organization. And I had this idea. What if we start this organization where if we all have these lived experiences with mental health, we're already breaking that barrier down. more people are going to feel comfortable talking with us. The problem getting people help is that they don't feel comfortable talking to the people that they're approaching. So if we already have told people, hey, we have these problems too, we can get more people help and they feel comfortable talking to us. So it's like support anyway. Why don't we just start an organization where we can do this together and we can raise awareness about the discrimination that happens, because it just happened to me. And he's like, you sound like you have an idea. Why don't we just do this? So We Matter 2 started. And we started filling our paperwork out at the end of February 2020, not expecting March of 2020 to happen. Not expecting that to happen.
I don't think any of us saw March of 2020 happening the way that it did.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but we started to fill our paperwork out, and that's when we started it, because I knew I needed to do something. And John was literally there the entire time it all happened to me, and I trusted him. And so we decided to do it together, because why do it by myself when I can do it with someone else? So we co-founded it together, and we did it, and we just started doing it. And I don't think we realized it was going to take off as quickly as it did, because when I joined Twitter in June of 2020, that's when I started on Twitter. I just made an account. And since June of 2020, I've grown. I'm over 7,000 followers now. I've done a TED Talk. I've written a book. I do podcasts and speak and all of that type of stuff. I've won an award. But like, that's the point is that we didn't expect all of the things that we've been able to do in the amount of time that we've done it. But I also think I underestimated how mad I was.
It's interesting that you say that, because anger in that sense can be such a fantastic motivator. And we have a tendency, and we've spoken about this on our show numerous times, that we judge and label emotions when emotions are not the problem. It is the actions we take for those emotions that I feel can be and should be appropriately judged positive, negative, et cetera, at least to a greater extent than the emotions, the base emotions themselves. There's nothing inherently wrong with being angry, sad, what have you. It is the actions that you take in furtherance of those emotions that create the problem.
Yeah, and I mean, on one hand, I don't think anybody, depending on their personality, some people do, but most people don't really expect instant success or rapid success or things like that. But at the same time, when there is an obvious need for something, then society at large hears the call. And I think that's what's happening here, because for too long, people have felt silenced, and professionals of all levels at this point are really feeling that. I think that especially these past few years, it's definitely come to a head. To dovetail on that, as a physician within our network, when COVID hit especially, we have an employee assistance program and things like that, and we have mental health workers that are able to reach out if any of our providers, nurse practitioners, doctors, all specialties, whoever, if they felt like they needed a hand reaching out. And my boss, who also is a psychiatrist, he told me there were nights I would wait for the phone call. He said it was interesting. He would be in a doctor's lounge and he would hear people crying, and he would hear the yelling and screaming, the frustration, all of this, the things that are going on in people's personal lives, all of that stuff. And he was the one that was the organizer and the supervisor for anybody calling in. Crickets. He would not get a call. And he took the opportunity to pull someone aside, and he said, look, there is no reprimanding here, no negative consequences, all that. I just want to know, because some of the things that this person was just venting to, he said, I'm here for you. And the person said, I understand that you as the individual are here for me, but the organization, the state licensing board, the professional association, are they there for me? And can I trust that? It's nice for you in the moment, but they basically said, there is no way I'm going to trust these larger organizations to have my back. And he had to basically keep his mouth shut, because he said he didn't have an answer for that.
And that's what we try to explain to people, is that we tell people we're not therapists, we are not trained. Like, we've all gone through mental health first aid, and I'm in the process of getting my boards as a psych pharmacist. So like I have extra training. I'm not just a pharmacist, I'm a psych pharmacist. So like I have extra training, but like there's something to say for people with lived experience who can just share experiences with each other and form bonds with each other. We're not treating each other, we're just talking to each other. And with such a backlog of getting into therapists and getting into counselors and social workers right now to get treatment, the way I see this as just that holding spot. We're just helping people right now in this holding spot until we can get them to that next. And we're just there for each other, because that's all that the Twitter. If anyone has come into, we just call it the community, and it's just literally a space where people come and hang out on Twitter. It's very weird, but it's like that's what it is. And like people just come and talk and associate and share, and you can need a pass to come. It's just come exist. And it's inclusive, and it's for people to just be. It's a wonderful place to, it's a very inclusive. And actually this past weekend has been a rough weekend for me. I've dealt with a little bit of cyberbullying, and the whole community has just come and been like, are you okay? Is everything all right? And they've been there for me. So like, it's just a place where people feel comfortable. But like you said, there's nobody there watching you. And you can be anonymous if you want.
Yeah. A shared, safe community space is so important these days, especially, I mean, now we're in the new era of Twitter, and so far, everything I've seen says, strap yourselves in, it's going to be a wild ride. So I feel like creating those types of environments where folks can come in and, to your point, just be is so vitally important. And it's important to note, Doc and I, both cis hetero dudes, that we have such privilege, and we understand that, we're aware of that, but not everyone has that ability to walk into a room and not have to worry if someone there wants to hurt you, or worse, just for existing. And so we're very proud of the community that we've built, small though it may be. We've got a Discord, we have conversations, we've been contacted through DMs and emails, etc., from people, and we have a channel in our Discord server that is literally just for mental health, and being able to say, hey, I'm struggling with stuff, I'm going through a rough period. Our friends over at Guardians MH, I don't know if you've ever had an opportunity to speak with them. They have a 501c3 as well, and they're very much on that same vein of creating that kind of safe environment. And they created something called an RTS bot, real-time support, I believe it's called, is what it stands for. And it gives you an opportunity to have access to services that if you're in crisis, it provides you with a list of resources. And it sounds very much like that's what We Matter too is. It's giving people an opportunity and access to resources that they may not necessarily be aware of off the bat.
Right.
And that is so, as I said, vitally important in this day and age, and especially even just in America, where I'm not going to get on a soapbox about the state
Right.
of mental health. We've done episodes about that. But Doc, I know you're looking like you got something to say as well.
Well, because even just day to day, not just in social media, but I work at a hospital. And one of the most rewarding things that I get to see during the week is one of the local organizations. Their name is Journey to Wellness, and they're fully peer support, not considered professional trained or anything, but they'll have groups on our unit just to let people know, like, it's okay. This is not something where you always need a professional with a license just holding your hand, doing everything a certain way, or focused heavily on medication or things like that, which of course is my bias because it's what I do for a living. It gives people an opportunity to learn about just random gatherings, get-togethers in the local community, and they point out like this isn't a pressure thing. It's not like, oh, well, you have to make a certain number of meetings to do this or that. Like nothing like that. It's just very inclusive and open-minded, and to see people in real time. I know that that can have a greater impact in terms of a person's quality of life than whether or not I'm making sure they are taking a medication every day. And sometimes it works both ways where patients have said to me, I really wasn't going to follow up with anything, but I talked to insert person here and they actually said they went to the same program and it seemed pretty cool. I'm like, okay, great. I'm glad they opened your mind so that you're more receptive to that or whatever. So I get to see it in real time with people in person. And I know that social media has that capability. And I'm aware of the cyberbullying thing as well, only because I try and do my homework before any podcast guests, and seeing that what was disturbing to me about it, not to go into details, and I'm not going to try and re-trigger anything. It's just that we just said this before starting the recording, or at least I did. Sometimes it's professional on professional, and I'm like, what are we doing? Why create this drama? I don't understand that aspect of it. I think people can have discussions about things that maybe you're not seeing eye to eye in terms of different techniques or different philosophies on things, but that's different than saying, I want to make this person feel bad. And that's what I think a lot of that is. And there's literally no point to it. I don't understand it. I'll admit I can't comprehend why anybody would do that to another human being. And the idea that I'm grateful, clearly we have enough people together that are able to combat that and squash it so that it doesn't become too pervasive, which is always my fear. And I admit this is not a hidden thing at this point. Anybody that knows me, I have a lot of social anxiety. So the online social anxiety is probably bigger now than anything I ever experienced in person. So
Mhm.
to see those things happen, I'm like, man, oh man, I am so grateful there are so many people that demonstrate a level of cohesion and strength to put it in its place so that it doesn't get out of hand.
Yes, yes. We have a community of people, and as an advocate, I take it very seriously to make sure that we're protecting as many people as possible. And unfortunately, that meant me putting myself on the line to call for accountability, and I unfortunately made myself a target. And so it was rough, and I'll deal with it for probably a while. And it's the same thing with the discrimination thing. Like, I could have ignored the person who did it to me and just let it go. But my thought process was, if I let this go, person's going to do it again, and I let this person do it again to somebody else. And I can't do that. Like, my brain doesn't let me do that. My brain says I need to do something because I can't let somebody else be harmed. Same thing goes with this is I feel like I know there's other people that have been harmed. If I don't do something, I'm letting other people be harmed. So I need to do something about it. And this was my way of standing up and saying, this isn't okay. Other people have been harmed. I know that I've also been harmed. So I need to stand up and say something. Now, yes, had it been a year? Of course it had been a year. I was terrified to do something about it. But I did something. It wasn't fun, but it happened. And I'm taking a mental health day from work on Monday because I just need to. But I already called my boss. And I also mentioned to my boss she might get some emails just so she knows. I'm also supported at work. So it kind of comes with the territory when you're working on social media. And this is actually the first time I've dealt with something like this. So I'm actually pretty lucky considering I've been on social media now for a little over 2.5 years. So I'm pretty fortunate. Our community is really good. We have a wonderful community of people who are very supportive of each other. So I figure it was worth it. It was worth it for the community of people that we have. So
Yeah, it's always difficult when you were the figurehead, so to speak, or spokesperson, whatever terminology you want to call it, in the sense that on one hand, you don't want to give these types of things oxygen. So there was always that mindset of ignore the bullies. I was always told growing up, don't pay them attention, don't pay them any mind, and they'll just give up and go away. Sometimes that works. Sometimes people are in it just for the lulls. They're just in it for the reaction. And sometimes they'll just, yes, give up and move on, for better or worse, to another target. Other times it becomes emboldening that, oh, well, they didn't say anything if I said this. Okay. What if I say this? And they take another step and another step. And this unfortunately goes well beyond social media. We see this a lot in the real world play out. We've seen this a lot over the past decade or so, that folks that are a lot more comfortable with saying the quiet things out loud and turning what used to be coded language and dog whistles into foghorns and klaxons, and just saying, oh, okay, this is fantastic. I mean, they just had the report now that over, I forget the percentage, some drastic percentage increase of the use of the N-word on Twitter in the hours following Elon Musk buying it. That's the kind of thing we're talking about, is trying to put a stop to it, nip it in the bud before it gets out of hand. But again, it's a balance, because as I said, sometimes you don't want to give it oxygen, because then if folks see that they're getting the response, oh, you think that's bad, okay, I'm just going to try that. And that's where the trolling comes in.
Yeah.
And side note, I've always had an issue with the overuse and the watering down of the term troll. Troll, to me, is somebody who says something very intentionally to elicit a particular response from somebody, oftentimes playing dumb. Like, that to me is a troll. Somebody who says something obtuse to get you to respond and take them seriously, as though what they're saying, as though they believe what they're saying, when they very clearly don't. Nowadays, people say trolls is anything negative on social media, and I'm like, no, I hate to be that, kind of gatekeeper about the term troll, but
A lot of terminology that happens on Twitter is like, once a word gets like in the terminology, and that it gets overused very quickly, like really quickly. And that happens so much. It's like the longer I'm on Twitter, it's like Twitter is its own beast, and it's very weird. Like, my husband doesn't get it. He's not on social media much, and I'll start talking about stuff and he's like, "You're talking about Twitter stuff, aren't you?" And I'm like, "How'd you know?"
yeah, there's that old expression that lie can get halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to get its pants on. Now, with social media and fiber optics and high-speed internet and everything, a lie has circulated the globe numerous times and has gone viral as a hashtag before the truth even goes, wait, what? The sadder part is that even when the truth is out there, the lie continues to circulate. It's not a situation of, oh, well, once the truth comes out, then people forget the lie, or the truth overtakes the lie. It's no, you still have people believing in the lie. And that's not even a political thing. That goes well beyond elections and things of that nature. That's just common or human nature and base understanding of psychology.
Yeah, I have a question related to all of this, because clearly we're talking about Twitter, which, as you said, is its own beast. But you've also written a book, you've also given a
Yes.
TED talk, so
Yeah.
I've seen it on YouTube, and I'm wondering, of all the different media types, is there one that you consider to be preferential in terms of delivering messages or fostering that community?
Well, we seem to do well on Twitter. I think because of the shortness of the tweets, a lot of our community does well with the shortness of the tweets. Now, I won't lie, a lot of us struggle with the rapidness of movement, because we do have people with ADHD, with autism, with PTSD, with traumatic brain injury. So, like, a lot of the rapidness of Twitter, a lot of times will confuse a lot of people in the community. So, like, a lot of times you'll find people will DM each other and be like, "I'm confused by this. Can you explain it to me, please?" And I am one of them. Because usually if there's a conversation that's going awry because people are rapid fire tweeting, and I'm like, what's happening? All I do is, if somebody else I know is in it, I'm like, I just go to the DM and I'm like, "Can you explain what's happening? I'm confused." Because with with my ADHD and autism, like I will get so confused. And then if there's context that I'm supposed to be teasing out that I get lost in anyway, someone's got to help me because I am lost. And I don't want to misinterpret something that especially if I'm talking to somebody and I don't want to mess it up anyway. And I want to make sure I understand. So like, I'm usually trying to understand people. So like, it can get hinky at times, but we're also really good at giving each other grace when somebody messes it up. So like, if somebody misinterprets something that somebody has said, instead of jumping on them and getting mad at them because they misinterpreted you, you just say, oh, no, that's not what I meant. I meant this. I'm sorry you misinterpreted me. Like, we're pretty good about that. Or if someone does get upset, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. I apologize. Like, we usually try to do the best we can. Now, of course, it doesn't always go well. And sometimes we have upset people, but it happens because, again, when you're dealing with mental health issues and neurodivergence, you're going to have issues. But as long as people, because see, my rule on my threads, I have a pinned post for a reason. As long as we're treating everybody with respect and we're doing the best we can, then everybody's fine. You know, it's when we start doing the low blows and we start reaching for name calling and we start getting rude that I step in and I'm like, okay, like, there's no need for this. It was a misunderstanding. Let's just try to be nicer and let's try to go with the perspective of this was a misunderstanding. Nobody meant any harm. And then if I have to, I block them. That's the rules. Everyone knows the rules. They've been the rules for almost a year now. I give people a chance. If they can't calm down or understand, then I block them.
Well, to that point, I would say, just as a caveat, that I think it makes the presumption that the people involved are coming from a place of seeking to understand.
Yeah.
Because without that, then the whole thing kind of falls apart. It's a trust system. It's an honor system that
Absolutely.
I am hoping that you are seeking wisdom, understanding,
Yep.
awareness, whatever that may be, this higher knowledge,
Yep.
same as me. If you are
Absolutely.
not, then we do not have any real thing in common. And I was just having this conversation with my sister recently. So much of social media is built upon gamification that understanding is way down on the list of priorities. And we were talking about this before we actually started recording. There's no room for nuance because it's not profitable. Nuance requires length, it requires understanding, and it requires a common level of courtesy and respect present to all people within the community. Under a social media network created to function within a capitalist system, those two things are necessarily at odds. You cannot create, I shouldn't say you cannot, but it has yet to be created where a social media network provides that kind of understanding and space, at least in that regard, writ large. Anyone who has used a social media company and a social media network for things like that and creates those spaces does so, I would argue, in defiance of the purposes for its creation. So
It doesn't
if you're
scale.
setting it up, you have to work at it and you have to be vigilant
Oh,
at
yeah.
it because the very nature of it, the entropy and the base level heads towards chaos and heads towards that kind of negative engagement, because that negative engagement drives clicks, it drives discourse, and it drives money. And that's what it's about. None of what we matter to, none of what Capes on the Couch, none of what we are really striving for is profitable under a capitalist system, and therefore it's not a priority. And so we have to fight against the tide just to gain some small fingernail claw hold to be able to say, I'm going to protect these people.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that because it reminds me of, I don't know if you remember this, Anthony, but this was way early in our podcasting where there was just one. I still remember it was just this one person that went on this like 3 or 4 page diatribe on Reddit just about how he felt we got it wrong, like one particular thing, and it was related to the person said they had a traumatic brain injury, PTSD, and they just
I
felt like,
remember it well.
yeah. So uh, there were two things that I thought about that in the moment, and of course now with the hindsight of 3 to 3.5 years. One is that I never took it personally because my point is that was that person's lived experience, and if there was something that I didn't get across that I should have in the moment, that, well, first of all, as a doctor, my thought was, okay, I didn't want to harm this person. That's one thing, of course. The other thing is, if it's one person saying that, so be it. I understand it, and I hope I can do better for that person. But we didn't end up what I was fearing at the time, because it was still so early on. My fear was that one person would lead to this torrent of people that would just say, like, see, this is how horrible these psychiatrists are. They clearly are not of the people. They don't understand and trying to ruin society and things like that. I went down this horrible emotional rabbit hole. I don't think I ever actually said this directly for a while there, where I was like, is this worth it? Am I just making things worse by putting out a professional voice? And thankfully, because of the support of you and the support of my family, it was like, well, no, of course not. I wouldn't have started this in the first place. A little introvert like me wouldn't have dared do something like this if I thought it was going to have a negative outcome. But at the same time, I still once in a while do think, like, I'm sure there's still once in a while things that either I say or we say collectively or you say where it's like, ooh, that kind of went the wrong way, and if that's the case, I would like to think that we have now the type of either loyal fans or just even people that happen to pass by once in a while that would be willing to say it to us and not just like kind of sweep it under the rug. I'd
Mhm.
like to think, as you said, that because of our format and because of how I've gotten the feedback from this from multiple people, the depth that we're willing to talk about hard things sometimes, that they
Mhm.
recognize that we've shown enough humanity that
Mhm.
whether it's Twitter, whether it's Discord, whether it's Facebook, or anything else, emails, it doesn't matter. We've shown enough of the human side to this that the platform doesn't matter. And that's why that's why I was mentioning that and why I asked that question in the first place, whether it's YouTube and all. Like, hopefully we will write a book someday. We can do this
Do it.
any way, any format, and still get the result that we want, regardless of the
Mhm.
money, regardless of the other motivating factors or whatever. And and having this type of discussion just emboldens me to think bigger and to think greater, which is something that, as Anthony knows about me, I would never, ever, ever have said before.
It's not just
So,
about the humanity, it's about the humility,
mm,
and having the humility to accept and acknowledge if we step incorrectly, if we say something that someone may take out of line.
Mhm.
Because again, we've been doing the show long enough now, to your point, Doc, that we have that backlog of stuff. And I think that's important. It's not just the humanity, it's the humility that has to necessarily come with that. So something I wanted to pivot to and ask Dr. Perkins is, every guest that we've spoken to on the show comes from a background where they're either a licensed therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. You do not have that direct medical knowledge. You said it's lived experience and things of that nature. What response has that created when you're you're giving the TED talk and you're going out there as a mental health advocate, as someone who does not have the letters following your name that might be considered, correct for the field or things of that nature? And I'm not trying to ask this question in a
No, no,
disrespectful
no.
manner. I'm sure you
Oh, no,
understand where I'm coming from.
I
What
do.
kind of feedback are you getting as a non-clinically, professionally
Yeah.
trained, quote unquote, mental health professional as an advocate?
Well, they love that I'm a pharmacist because mental health, because, well, I'm almost board certified as a psych pharmacist. I'm very close. I'm waiting for my results from my test. I wish they would just give it to me. I took it on September 26th. I'm just waiting for my results. But I've been in the psych area for 4 years now. But they love that I'm a pharmacist, because when I did start doing this, I knew I had a unique platform as a pharmacist, because, and Doc can probably relate, they don't directly say this to us, but they kind of say to us, you shouldn't talk about your mental health problems. Don't talk about it. Shh, shh, don't talk about it, because then they won't trust you as medical professionals. Again, they never fully said these things to us, but like as if I listened, because I still talked about it. And I did share this with my patients as I was a pharmacist, because you could always tell with my patients, because I'm really good at like reading people's faces, and I did it with my students too. Anytime I would ask them if they were okay, they'd like give me this look like, can I tell you? And again, this is where we got the idea for We Matter too, about the breaking the barriers part. Because if they're afraid to tell me, I'm like, oh, this has something to do with mental health. You just always know. So if I share a little bit about the fact that I have generalized anxiety disorder, agoraphobia, I deal with these things too. I take medication. If you tell them just a little bit, they feel comfortable sharing. So the fact that I was a pharmacist was just icing on the cake, honestly, because I had this platform, I should use it, especially because I'm talking about my mental health. Because a medical professional talking about their mental health is like worth their weight in gold, because it doesn't happen very frequently. And I've talked at pharmacy schools, and to hear this pharmacy students, like, they come up to you and they're like, I have mental health issues, and being a student and hearing you talk about it as a pharmacist, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's incredibly powerful. And I do have a random aside with that, because where I work, we actually do have a psych pharmacy residency. So I get to see some people go through this. Yeah, yeah. So as soon as you
love
mentioned
it.
September 26th, I'm like, yeah, our resident just did that. So it's fascinating to hear that, because at least when it comes to pharmacy, people have a general view. They don't really know about some of the details, the nitty gritty of what you go through. And I have the utmost respect. I have to say, our experienced psych pharmacists are teaching a few of our nurse practitioners in our system very well, because they didn't feel comfortable with certain medications in terms of prescribing. And there's a lot that goes into it. And I know our doctors as well, our psychiatrists, they appreciate the feedback. They remind us when we're supposed to do blood work for patients and monitoring. It's incredible. So I don't want to shortchange that. That's beautiful work. That is well needed work. And that's one side. And then the other side, of course, as you mentioned, where people don't mention this, professional disclosure is something that, at least in my training, they made it a very hard line for us. And they just simply said, well, you're never supposed to say anything to any patient ever. And I threw that out the window, I would say, within the first 2 or 3 weeks, because I realized the more I did that, the less authentic I felt. And I, carefully, of course, I mean, I don't go too far, but I made sure that patients recognize that life happens to all of us. And if they saw that it happened to me in terms of either something that was relatable or something that was very direct to them, like it directly related to them, then that usually allowed for the person to explore things about themselves that they had walled off on their own. It wasn't just the idea of I can't tell anybody else about it. It's, well, if I don't tell anybody else about it, then that means I don't even have to deal with it myself. And I always wanted to foster the exact opposite. Like, I can talk about some of the things, whether it's a formal diagnosis or not. I can at least say, hey, I definitely have had panic attacks. I definitely have had anxiety. I've definitely had some negative events that have happened similar to what you just described. That just opens up the world. It is incredible how big a difference that can make. And I was scared to do that, where I would only do that one-on-one. But since I work in a hospital, I'm working with nurses, social workers, people like that. And I said, okay, as long as I keep it separate, and I realized, wait a minute, patients are going to talk about this anyway. So I got comfortable enough where if I do that, I've noticed some social workers, I've noticed some nurses where we're willing to have conversations with each other now that we never had before. It's like, hey, so how are you dealing with that? I heard, unfortunately, whatever, your sister relapsed, or you did, like, whatever. And people talking about things that they wouldn't even talk about, even within the field. That
Yes. Yes.
that is one of the most rewarding things about it.
Yes.
I can't emphasize that enough. When
And it's a
people
great
amongst
feeling.
each other, yeah,
It's a
it
great
really is.
feeling.
Absolutely.
It's just how that passionate feeling he's emanating, like, I get that too. And you just feel it, and it's just like you want it to, like, you want to pass it on. And I did it with my students too. I mean, you could tell with my students, even they wouldn't want to share, and I'd share a few things. And when I was teaching pharmacy, I had a revolving door on my door at school, and everyone would be like, how do you always have so many students? I was like, do you try listening? And they were like, what do you mean? And I'm like, do you try listening? And I'm like, that's all I do. And they're like, it's got to be more than that. And I'm like, not really. It's really not. But and it's just that great feeling, because then they talk. Go to Dr. P. She listens, and they know to come to you because you're a safe space. And so it's that feeling.
That trust and
Yes.
that safeness, that security, that again comes with trust, and that comes from a place of no judgment, no stigma, and to your point,
Absolutely.
just listening, and just
Mhm.
listening and letting them say what it is that they need to, because so many times they will talk themselves towards the solution.
Mhm.
And if only someone would give them that space. That happens so many times. This is why, full disclosure, I talk to myself all the time. If I'm alone, if I'm in the car, I will talk to myself. Half the time, if I'm driving to work, I'll turn the music off and I'll just have a conversation with myself and just follow where my brain goes. And as I'm talking things aloud, I will go, huh, you know, this is very interesting. And I was just I was just talking to my sister the other day, and I was explaining to her one of the reasons why I vent is not that I'm looking for you to provide me with a solution. It's I'm looking for you to sit there quietly, or just, wow, that sounds really hard for you. Like, let me come to my own conclusions before jumping down my throat with what you think I should do. Because what you think I should do is not necessarily what I'm going to come to. Now, I may come to that same conclusion, but it's going to be a lot more powerful if I do it myself.
Mhm.
You can lead that horse to water and you can shove the head under there until the bubbles stop, but it's not really going to be a long lasting and fruitful situation versus them going there and going, oh, you know what? I think I am pretty thirsty now that I think about it. And now I've had a chance to process it. So again, that listening, that
Mhm.
whole, well, we have two ears and one mouth, so we need to listen twice as much as we speak. I think one of our teachers in high school said that, Doc, didn't they?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah, somebody said that. Now, one of the last things I want to discuss, and this is something that we keep coming back to this discussion of social media, and it's funny that I'm bringing this up. Not only is it something I've seen recently, but we also on our show kind of had a very similar discussion, an entire episode kind of centered around discussions of diagnosis on social media and things of that nature. And something that I saw recently on social media, and I kind of want your take on this as well, is somebody said a self-diagnosis is just as valid as one that you get from a doctor. And now I want to just sort of explain, at least provide somewhat of a caveat, that I understand that there are certain folks that may not trust doctors. They may have had bad experiences with medical professionals. And so therefore, if someone is telling you, as a medical professional, this is my professional opinion because I studied, I have the white coat and the whole 9 yards and the fancy letters after my name, et cetera, et cetera. And this is therefore what I think you should do, versus the lived experience that this person has. But as we've seen on social media, a lot of times folks tend to say their lived experiences as representative of the whole. And I think that's where we get into problems. And so with respect to self-diagnosis and statements of, well, I did this and therefore I believe that I have bipolar or dissociative identity or ADHD, anxiety, whatever the case may be, as an advocate for the community and as someone who is a medical professional, but again, not from that not from that school of thought. What are your, I guess, takes on self-diagnosis and discussions on social media?
I'll use myself as an example. So currently, I am in between self-diagnosis and formal diagnosis of autism. So I had wondered for a while about autism. I had been questioning it. I have ADHD. I have diagnosed ADHD. I had it my whole life. That's no question about that one. But meeting one of my friends who her and I are very similarly diagnosed formally with both ADHD and autism. And I started to wonder, because we have a lot of similarities. I was starting to wonder. I was like, we do that. We both do that. And then some other things I was learning, and I was starting to question my OCD diagnosis. I was like, is that actually OCD or is that autism? So I started wondering. So I asked my friend, she's a therapist. I was like, are there screening tests that you can do, like official screening tests that you can do that can tell you if there's a possibility that you're autistic? And she was like, yes, there are. And I was like, okay. So I did them. And lo and behold, as if I were shocked, both of them said I was autistic. And one of them, as I was doing it, I told her, I said, is this supposed to explain my entire life? And she goes, Ashley, if it's explaining your entire life, I have some news for you. You're probably autistic. And I started laughing. I was like, okay, thank you. So I was like, okay. So I hadn't said anything yet. I was like, okay, I'm going to let this kind of percolate, right? I was like, I'm going to let this process in my brain. So I scored like a 169 on the RAASD or DS. And then I did the autism quotient and I got a 40 on that one. So I was like, I'm gonna let this process for a hot minute.
You can see my sorry about that. You can see my reaction there.
I know. But I was like, I'm gonna let this processing. I started to read people's like their experiences and everything. And I started to peel my onion back, right? Looking back over my experiences as I was growing up. It explains a lot of things that I went through as a kid. And I'm like, so I have a formal diagnosis set up for February. And I'm looking at my own child and I'm starting to see it in my own child. I knew like ADHD in my own child was that we've been seeing but I'm also seeing it in him. So I'm like 95% sure. So I'm in the boat of that self-diagnosis can be valid. It should be done with the research, looking into it, because the problem is with getting in with formal diagnosis can be very hard. Like I'm waiting until February and I called in October. So like I'm waiting a long time to get in. It can be expensive. People don't have access a lot of times. So like these screening tests, I mean, the two I used, from what I understand, are supposed to be pretty accurate.
Yep. So here's where I'll jump in.
Yeah, you go for it.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, as a professional, and since you're not my patient, I can't give any formal official diagnosis, disclaimer, et cetera, et cetera. But I know we're doing a podcast, so people couldn't see my face or anything. But when you gave some of the information and the numbers, I had kind of a dramatic reaction. And my point was like, wow, that puts a high probability. And I'll leave it at that. The thing I was going to say about all of this is, and I don't think I'm hiding any secrets here. Anybody that has done anything from take a psychology course in college to, in this case, if you're a med student and you went through a psychiatry rotation or whatever, we all do this. This isn't something that's new. The idea that people will say things like this on social media, I get it. And I feel like I've come full circle with this. And what I mean by that is because I'm in a in a hospital setting now professionally as my full-time job. I will have been for my entire career, but I also did outpatient as well. I've noticed my take on this was different. If you asked me this a decade ago, I would be much more like very, pardon my language, like tight-assed about it. I would have said like, oh, okay, look, there's no way that a person is going to be able to recreate years and years of training to come to formal diagnoses and things like that. And yet I remember as a student, the whole point is the patient is your textbook. You learn more from the people that you're dealing with than just reading about something. And that is the truth. And talking to colleagues about it and continuing to look at journals and updated research and continuing to assess your own biases about how you make diagnoses because of what you see. I'm one of those people, unfortunately, at least I'm aware of it, where half of everything I'm going to see is going to end up looking like bipolar because so many patients I've seen have had bipolar diagnoses previously and are coming in because of severe depression or suicide attempts or manic episodes and not sleeping and all this other stuff. But I make the other diagnoses in the wide spectrum of whatever it is that is considered mental health. I'm used to it, but I know that I have to be aware of my blind spots, and it's a pretty good idea for a patient to come to me with their own ideas and agenda, even if it's not something that I immediately agree with, because it opens my mind to the things that I need to consider in that person's life. So let me put it this way. I may not automatically agree with what a patient says their diagnosis is, but if a patient tells me that a symptom that they're having, I can at least validate, okay, that is something you're experiencing for sure. This is what I'm seeing that matches that, or maybe something you hadn't considered either. And we're doing it together. It's collaborative, it's not a one-way street. So I don't know necessarily if it has to be something that's declared ahead of time, especially on social media, because then that starts to impact how others are going to interact with the person. So I would still exercise a significant amount of caution, but I'm not totally against the idea that someone at least starts the groundwork for their own self-development. I think that can be a wonderful thing. It doesn't have to
Absolutely.
have, and I've said this with so many patients though. For some people, it's not going to come to a final label. And when I've
Mm.
talked to people where I've sought help for myself, and though they're trying to be nice when they say it to me, they're like, "You are such a weird mix." And can tell they didn't want to come to something formal with me only because they're like, if we pigeonhole you, you're going to, and they know this about my personality, and Anthony knows this too, then you're going to run with it, and you're probably going to dig yourself into this rabbit hole of research and knowledge about that one topic and pigeonhole yourself to the point that you exclude everything else, and technically you may make yourself worse. And that's what other professionals have said about me. So I'm willing to acknowledge it, and I don't hide it. I don't shy away from it. So I've learned, like, okay, it's okay to go down these paths, and it's great for the information and the knowledge base. Sometimes having a Sherpa on that mountain climb can be really helpful though. So at this point, what I say to patients, I'm like, you know what? I'm not even going to focus on the labels. I'm going to tell you the things that I think are going to help your life. If it makes you feel better to get that title or whatever, if I agree with it, I'll only do it if it's ethical. But if I agree with it, fine. I'll go ahead and I'll put it there. If you don't even need it, or you rather not because you think it'll be hurtful, fine, cool. I'll keep that confidential. But the point is, there's many, many ways to go about it. I think social media has shown that. I think it could be an amazing thing. I also tell people just be careful.
Yeah, it's definitely that situation where you you read something and you go, yeah, that resonates with me, and then you start focusing in on that to the perhaps potentially and detrimentally to your point, Doc, the exclusion of other, I don't want to say exculpatory evidence, but other evidence that, well, that's the lawyer in me thinking exculpatory stuff, but other evidence that might say, but you're ignoring this other stuff that shows that it might not be that, because you're so honed in. And we talked about this in the episode. It was literally called Dr. TikTok. And it was this discussion about how folks speak about their lived experience as though it is representative, comprehensive for a particular diagnosis, and that, oh, if you have this X, Y, and Z, you therefore, all people with ADHD do this, or if you do X, Y, and Z, you have bipolar disorder or anxiety or whatever the case may be. And that may be true for that individual with that particular diagnosis. It does not mean that everybody does it. Now, is it great to get this broad spectrum of discussions? Absolutely. I'm of the mindset that the more people talking about this, and again, to your organization's point as well, if we destigmatize these discussions and we're free to talk about this, we're going to find those commonalities. We're going to find those similarities. We're going to be able to say, I'm not as different as I thought I was, which is wonderful. It's great to the human nature. We are, by definition, social creatures. But when you start to use that as seeking a community solely for the purpose of, or solely building the community around the diagnosis to the exclusion of everything else, is where I think it starts to become potentially detrimental. So I'm a big fan of folks speaking honestly and truly about their life experiences, because I think we could all stand to benefit from it. And it's totally okay to hear someone else talk about their life experience or listen to their TED talk or whatever the case may be and say, oh, that's something that's very similar that I've encountered. And if that leads you on that path of understanding and of discovery towards whatever that might be for you, that's fantastic. It's where you take somebody else saying, oh, they did this and they have whatever the disorder may be. I do this, therefore I also have this disorder. I think that's where that's where it starts to become an issue.
And in my book, I put like multiple caveats that say, just because I have this does not mean that you do. You might recognize some of these things in you, but I urge you to talk to your doctor. Don't diagnose yourself with my book. I literally say it because I was like, I don't want people taking my book into their doctor and saying, no.
It says here on page 73 that she experienced this, this, and this. There, I did it too. Therefore, we are the same. I need you to diagnose me with this. And the doctor's going to go, how about no?
I wanted to make sure that I was being clear that this is my experience, but this is not because I did put research in my book. So like, I wanted to be clear, just because there's research in here doesn't mean that you can diagnose yourself.
Yeah, and it comes down to your personal ethics, your professional ethics, and that need to disclose that. Social media doesn't have those parameters. It doesn't have those requirements, whether formally or informally. So anybody can go on TikTok and make a video and say, I have this, therefore, this is dispositive of whatever the disorder might be. You writing a book with publishers and things of that nature, that you are bound by those ethics, and you want to make sure that you are not unnecessarily and incorrectly steering people towards something that may or may not be truthful, is a credit to you. But also, as I said, it's one of the dangers of social media. And so I just wanted to kind of have that discussion. I think it's been very helpful and very enlightening that, it goes back to the thing we were saying earlier. It's all about the nuance. It's not a binary. It is not self-diagnosis is good or self-diagnosis is bad. It's self-diagnosis can be helpful on the path, but
yes,
I push back against, those kind of absolutist type statements, because I find, and I recognize the meta irony within this, absolute statements are never correct. They're never comprehensive. And yes, again, I recognize tongue in cheek, as it always is, where and when I say that. So we're going to wrap this up then. Dr. Perkins, why don't you give us a little bit more info on We Matter 2 and where folks can find you and some of the resources that are available through the organization?
So We Matter 2 is just wematter2.org. That's our website. And all of our resources and all different types of fun stuff is on the website. You can find me on Twitter. It's at Because I Matter. And I'm on Twitter all the time. Like, you always can find me. And then all of our social media is at We Matter 2 INC. And that's for Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Keeping it easy.
There you go. And the book as well.
The book. It's
the book
on Amazon. I Matter 2.
Excellent. Buy my book. buy my book. That is a reference that Doc might get. I don't
Oh,
know
yes.
if I don't know if
Oh,
that
The Critic. Oh,
I don't know
man.
if you ever watched The Critic,
Ooh,
Dr. Perkins,
Boy,
but
oh,
that
I
was
have
boy.
not. I have
okay. That
not.
was
Wow.
yeah, that was mid to late 90s.
Yeah,
Uh,
wow, that's obscure.
Dr. Perkins, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. This has been enlightening. We're going to have links to all that stuff in the show notes when this episode comes out. Because as our friend Chris from Play Comics always says, clicking on things is so much easier than typing things out. And speaking of Play Comics, they are another show on the Gonna Geek Network. You can find not just our show, but other wonderful shows like Play Comics or Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. on the GonnaGeek.com website. We're a proud member of the Gonna Geek Network. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Capes on the Couch. You can find all of our episodes on our website at capesonthecouch.com. And thank you again so much for listening. Dr. Perkins, pleasure as always. And, hopefully if schedules permit, we'd love to have you back on the show at some point.
I'd love to come back.
That is excellent, and we're very glad to hear that. So for Doc Issues and Dr. Ashley Perkins, I am Anthony Sitko. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.